Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Staffordshire Police Fire and Crime Panel on today, Monday, February the 5th. Welcome, everyone. Just be advised that this meeting is being webcast. You've all had a copy of the agenda, so hopefully we can make a start and move through it at a reasonable pace. So, item 1 on the agenda, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Adrian Bowen and Councillor Maycock.
Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any? No, thank you. Item 3 on the agenda are minutes of the last meeting, 13th of November 2023. I assume everyone's read those and no additional comments. Charlotte, yes.
I don't know whether it's appropriate to raise it here, but matters arising from previous meetings.
The CCTV question, is
Yep.
it? Yes, please ask the Commissioner.
Okay. Commissioner, on issues coming back from previous meetings, I think dated February 2023, we were looking at the whole thing about CCTV, and it's down in the paperwork as being ongoing. Could you give us an update on where we are in terms of the effectiveness of CCTV and where we are in terms of the police accessing images, etc.? Because I've sort of lost contact with where we are in terms of CCTV across Staffordshire, because it is only a tool. I recognise it's only one tool that the police use, but if we're using CCTV and we have a contract for CCTV, then I would hope that whether the local authority is responsible or the police are responsible, that it should be working and that the police should be able to access it. So it's down in the paperwork as an ongoing issue. Perhaps you could give us an update.
Apologies, Chairman, Councillor Atkins. I'm going to struggle to do that. I can't quite recall the specific issue. CCTV is a huge
talking about the
conversation.
incompatibility of technology.
Yeah.
That's what the reference was made to CCTV data from district councils which could not be downloaded by the police.
Okay.
Now, I think there's one issue about the police having to go to Leek Police Station, wherever they might be in the Moorlands, for instance, but I'm sure that this is replicated in other parts of Staffordshire as well.
There are a huge number of different CCTV technologies, and actually this is an area of technology that's moving super quickly. It seems that everybody on their front door at the moment has got a different type of technology. The good news is most of them store information to the cloud, and actually the amount of information being recovered from Ring doorbells, although there are other manufacturers available, and various other sources like that is proving to be really helpful in investigation. Also dash cams, people wearing cameras on their helmets, helmet cams. So the issues are typically more with older CCTV and some older council estates. Now I know a number of councils and authorities are looking to upgrade. I know Moorlands has recently upgraded and gone to some new digital cameras, better images, etc. And again, the good news there is quite often you can recover, or the officers investigating can recover information without having to make visits to police post sites where perhaps discs and other means have recorded the data. It's few and far between where they have to do that. I think there might be an issue in Cheadle, and I think there was an issue down in Kinver, but they're looking to put some new equipment in there now. So it's more of a general thing that this is an area of where the technology is moving very quickly. There's also real help from products such as evidence.com, and our resolution centre and others will, without having to visit, they'll talk people through how best to upload CCTV for investigation. I visited a couple of retail stores recently. The Co-op are all over this. They have a pretty good system. They all know how to upload data. But the Spa I visited, which is a franchise, it tends to be different from region to region. different technologies. It can take a little time for them to prepare evidence to assist the service. I'm very interested in CCTV in the wider sense. I mean, you've asked me a question we could talk about for hours here. There is no magic bullet solution to upgrading older equipment. If you're aware of a particular issue, then I'm very happy to pick up on it with you. But I do know that in Cheadle, there is consideration. In fact, you and I were in conversation last week about how we might invest in some mobile CCTV and other equipment to move that forward. I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, just picking up on a point you made, Commissioner, there about the fast-moving technology. Maybe that is something that's covered by one of the lines in your budget, the transformation. So I think we'll keep our eye on that one because I think all elected members recognise the benefit of CCTV. And I know our local commander has said to me that a lot of officers spend a lot of time now interpreting doorbell information and anything else that they've got in their vehicle. So it's a challenging activity at the moment, I think, for everyone. So thank you, Charlotte. Is there anything else on that? No, that's fine. Thank you. Decisions published by the Commissioner since the last meeting, there hasn't been any. Item 4 on the agenda. Item 5 on the agenda is questions to the Commissioner from members of the public. Mr. Bradbury sits with us in the room today. He has asked a question. Would you like to ask a supplementary, Mr. Bradbury?
No, thank you.
Does he get another chance? Not at the moment. Right, thank you. Item 6 on the agenda, the proposed budget and precept for 24-25. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman, colleagues. A number of you are new to this. You may or may not be aware that this is really the heaviest duty placed on me to set budgets for police and fire and rescue service. And when I say heavy, just to give you some sense of the amount of work that goes into it. It's something we're talking about almost the day after the previous budget is set. So it's a non-stop process. I'd particularly like to thank the finance team, the estates team, the IT team back at police. They've been very busy working with us on this year. And I'm not sure if all of you have met Catherine before. Catherine's my new 151 officer. She'll be taking us through a little bit of the detail in a moment. And Catherine's been really tremendously helpful in pulling this together. It's been a very interesting year. I think, Chairman, you'll be encouraged to see that we've pretty much delivered a budget as set last year. In fact, there's a little underspend and there's a contribution back to reserve, which is good news. And you'll also see that next year is looking reasonably solid too. And that actually is after investment in additional resources for more proactive policing. The service is in a much better place in terms of its responsiveness than it was a couple of years ago. And they are ready to move more into surveillance, other activity, which is key if we're to get under organised criminals, driving drug crime, particularly vehicle crime in Staffordshire in the last 18 months, van and car thefts, and other crime related to organised activity. A fair bit of that is involved with rural and retail crime too. So more proactive policing, getting out there, identifying the culprits before incidents happen. And anybody online at the moment will see that the Roads Policing Unit is incredibly busy identifying stolen vehicles, pulling people over for not paying their insurance and so on. Now, you don't need beady eyes to see that there is a considerable investment in the service for the following 2 or 3 years. And a substantial increase in our capital programme. That's mostly made up with investments in IT, but also in estates. And I think interesting point in time really, there's been some expertise brought into the organisation around IT. He was in a position to give us a thumbs up for stabilising the IT. The agile working, we've got officers, staff working not only from home occasionally, but from different locations, different stations. They're now doing that really very reliably. That was not the case a couple of years ago as we were coming out of COVID, and absolutely essential. So the systems are strong and stable, if you like. I think somebody used that phrase some years ago. But he identified that there was considerable investment needed to keep it that way, to stay ahead in terms of patching, stay ahead in terms of networks, and to make sure particularly we're in a position to take advantage of new technologies, some of which you've mentioned, Chair, and I'm sure we'll come back to later, including artificial intelligence and how that might lend itself to more productivity from our officers and staff. There's also new projects, revisited projects around estates, and that's about making sure that we've got a local presence, absolutely important, vital, that every neighbourhood is supported by the local police team, and also the investment in estates to make sure that the officers and staff have a good working environment, and we keep it like that as much as possible for the next 20 or 30 years. That's all about planning to be an outstanding police force. Not a police force that's just dealing with today, but a police force that's ready to really take on the challenges of the future. It comes with some pressure, because not only do we need to realise the savings and the benefits of those investments, but we do need to make efficiencies. And I'm sure you've noticed that the service did a super job this year of saving getting on for £7 million, exactly as it was set the task to do. And that is the nature of the challenge in the next 3 or 4 years, to do more of the same. I'm confident they will, but I'm also very realistic that there's a considerable uncertainty going down the line. We've seen increased cost of capital, inflation and others, certainly pay increases in this last 2 years. I'm not sure those are going to go away, and I'm not sure nationally what the position will be in terms of being able to support public services like the police from central resources. So it's with that in mind that I set out to consult. I'd like to thank everybody, every member of the public and everyone who contributed to the consultation on the council tax. There's been a move in the last 10 years to more local funding of local services, which in principle I don't disagree with. I think it's about local accountability, making the case for investment and asking the public to back that. That's what I'm doing today. I'm asking the public to support an investment in Staffordshire Police being the very, very best service they can be. At the same time, appreciate that every ask at the moment is considerable. So this ask is lower than the inflation factors used for pay, benefit, pension increases in recent months. My last ask was lower. My last ask actually last year was the lowest increase in council tax in the country. This year it's at the limit of £13, which government has set. But I'm sure, in fact I'm absolutely certain, it will help us to deliver a very, very excellent service. So, Chairman, with your permission, could I ask Catherine just to work through the details of the document?
Yes, please.
And then we'll come back for some questions.
Yes, please. Over to you, Catherine. Put the light on. No, you need your light on.
Turn yours off.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Okay, good afternoon, Chairman, members of the panel. So I'm going to present the suite of budget and MTFS reports today for review with yourselves. So as you'll be familiar, there's 4 reports, the main one being the budget report, which touches on the revenue budget for next year, the proposed precept for the police and crime element of the council tax, and the proposed MTFS for the following 3 years. up to and including 27-28. There's the paper for the capital strategy, reserve strategy, and then the treasury management strategy as well. There's a lot of information in all those reports. I'm just going to pick out the high-level bits for you rather than going into the detail today. So I wanted to start with the main report, which is the budget and MTFS paper. And I wanted to start by focusing on the current financial year, so 23-24. So at the moment, we're forecasting to finish this financial year with a small underspend, about 142,000. This shows the current year budget has been managed well, despite the inflationary pressures we're a bit all familiar with. It also includes the achievement of nearly all the 7 million savings that were set out in the MTFS last year. And it also sees the recruitment in full of the additional 60 police officers and £500,000 investment into the automatic number plate recognition cameras across the county. So we're starting to produce the budget for 24-25 and the MTFS from a good place. Moving on to next year's budget then, so for 24-25, the net budget requirement for the group, Staffordshire Police and Commissioner's Office, is just short of 265 million. You might recall in the November update when I came to panel we talked through the significant pay and inflationary pressures that the force is facing, most noticeably the average 7% pay award that they had in September and the contracts that are linked to CPI and indeed higher RPI. Since then we've had the draft settlement from the Home Office. That was a one-year settlement only as part of the last year of the current spending review. Overall in year it was good, with some additional grant for increased pension costs and uplift maintenance grant increase to cover incremental progression and pay awards, but that is for 1 year only, not moving forward. So overall, there was a reduced gap from 24-25. It was 5.8 million when I came in November. That's come down to broadly 3.5 now, and that involves a draw on the budget support reserve of 1.6 million for next year, and I'll come back to reserves a little bit later. So the paper also includes the raising the precept by the maximum allowable of 4.99%. This is equivalent to £13 per year or 25p per week for a Band D property. In raising this, it will generate an additional 4.7 million, and that's excluding the collection fund and any surplus or deficits. And this increased precept will generate additional monies to allow for crucial investments into the service, including capital funding to invest in infrastructure across Staffordshire, so with refurbishment of police stations and custody facilities, EV infrastructure and sustainability schemes to reduce running costs and meet the government's net zero ambitions. And there's also, like you've mentioned, capital funding to invest in technology services. These are around taking advantage of new technologies like artificial intelligence to free up officer time to target criminals, prevent harm and protect the residents of Staffordshire. So this report does recommend increasing the police and crime precept by 4.99%. Moving now on to the MTFS. So for the remainder of the period, so the 3 years from 25-26 through to 27-28, the forward planning for this has been challenging, to say the least. There's significant inflationary pressures that still remain and several uncertainties around pay, and not least the future spending reviews and a possible change in government. So you'll see the MTFS includes forecast figures post years 24-25, and that does have a budget gap of 19 million when we get to the end of March 28. This isn't actually a significant increase since the update when I came to panel in November. So the comparable figure then was 13 million, and that figure now is 14 million. Obviously, there's an extra year on the end of the MTFS, which takes it up to 19 this time round. I just think the panel should note this increasing gap is driven by many factors outside of the Commissioner's control or that of the police. I would say there's clear recognition in the force that 90 million is a significant gap. And therefore the process to address it has started already, and that process is overseen by the new Deputy Chief Constable John Roy. So although there's a significant gap, both the force and the Commissioner are confident that we can achieve the level of savings required. Just to touch on the capital strategy paper, so this sets out the significant investment that we've already mentioned into the capital programme, particularly around ICT and estates. And this ensures the force continues on its journey to becoming an outstanding force. So the capital programme is now 83 million over the MTFS period. That is a significant increase from what it was. It's nearly doubled. all the detail behind that is in the paper. I'm not proposing to go through that detail now. Just wanted to mention, the programme is fluid, so we're in a much better place with the capital programme in terms of it being, I think, a bit more realistic now. No spend is incurred on a project until that full business case has been approved through the full governance mechanism. So it is likely other things may be added, but equally other things may come out of that. It is a moving sort of programme all the time. I want to make the point as well that the revenue consequences of the increased capital programme and the increased debt charges around that and financing costs are included in the budget and MTFS report. Okay, and just to make the point, these actually remain low compared to other local public sector bodies. Moving on to the Treasury Management Strategy, so this sets out a strong position again. We've brought down the levels of debt in year by paying off our loans where we could, and we're continuing to prioritise using cash reserves where possible ahead of external borrowing. As we move into the later years in the MTFS, as I've mentioned, there is a significant capital investment, so there are external borrowing charges that will be incurring then, and we will have to go out to borrow. Again, those costs are in the revenue budget. The Treasury Management Strategy doesn't refer to them because that's written looking purely at 24-25, and for that year we're not borrowing. It refers to the need to borrow, but I just want to make the point that the revenue budget has got those borrowing costs in already. So if we did need to borrow, what I'm saying is the revenue position wouldn't change. It is potentially timed quite well as well when we need to come to borrow externally, because the forecasts say sort of September to 2024, we're expecting interest rates to have come down by that point, potentially stabilised, so we're in a stronger position when we do need to come to borrow, that interest rates might be more beneficial for us. And then finally, the reserve strategy documents. This sets out the position for the earmarked reserves and general fund reserves, so all reserves in total are a bit over 42 million. This is a robust position for Staffordshire Police and Commissioner's Office, and this is a sizable amount to have in reserves compared to comparable forces, particularly forces in the region, nearby regions, sorry. And the general reserve level continues to be more than 3% of the net revenue budget, which is a requirement set by the Commissioner. So to summarise sort of all those papers, I think overall we've got a very strong position in the current year. We've got an underspend, we've got a good and balanced budget for the following year for 24-25. And although there is a gap by the end of the MTFS period, there is a plan to address this in place. And just on that, I would note that some forces and certainly some local governments are facing a gap larger than 19 million at the moment for next year, for 24-25 for their budget. So is this a prudent MTFS? Yes, definitely. Is it pessimistic? Perhaps a little bit, yeah, looking through like Eeyore's eyes at it, possibly around some of the assumptions, but I think it's the right thing to be doing at the moment, given so many uncertainties that we're coming up to face. So that's my sort of update on the reports. Happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for that. May I ask you to put your microphone off? Thank you. I'm sure colleagues will have a few questions in a moment, but just picking up on a couple of things that you mentioned. You've said that the document was comprehensive and detailed. It certainly is. It takes some reading, really. So some of these questions, I expect you to say, well, the answer's on page 8, but we will have missed it. Could you give me some sort of insight into what efficiency savings you have in mind? How will that manifest itself? And at this early stage, have you any examples of what benefits AI will bring to the Commissioner's Office and the police ultimately? Perhaps I'll just start with those two questions, if I may.
Thank you. Yeah, the efficiencies are, to some degree, more of the same in terms of there's been some really excellent work on managing costs of contracts, making sure that we value for money. I think we continually rate as one of the leanest in terms of enabling services in the country. The key is the investments. The investments are to lead to productivity gains. Now, this will allow us, I think, to offer a better service without necessarily having to expand the officer and staff resource to the same degree that services have had to in the past. It's not just, putting it plainly, you can solve a problem by chucking people at it, but it's not a long-term solution. It's not sustainable, and it's not necessarily affordable. What we're looking for is to get the absolute maximum return from our investment in people. Now, having said that, the Chief Constable, and I support him, is still very keen to have more officers. We're not at our peak number of officers as the majority of other force areas are, although we're close. But we also need more staff, more specialists, particularly in areas such as digital forensics. Some more staff specialists in those areas around relationships, domestic abuse, families looking after children, IT, fraud, some of what we talked about earlier, really, the resolution centres, CCTV. You don't need a warrant necessarily to be excellent in those areas, supporting investigations. So we would like more officers, more staff, but we would like every one of them to be more productive, not to be doing unnecessary admin work. Some of the investment is in what's called robotics, and this is areas of work where processes at the moment might involve double or triple handling by people. If we develop the programming, we're talking about bringing IT experts in to actually write stuff that would allow for that to be automated. Now that means those individuals are in a better position to do the people-facing stuff that they're very good at. It's also about efficiencies as well. Some of the work on estates is to bring down costs. We're investing in solar panels, some quite substantial investments in that. Looking at more efficient heating systems, lighting systems, all of the advantages that come from having modern buildings. We're in a decent place actually compared with a lot of other areas. We're not generally the service isn't generally working out of Victorian buildings that look Victorian. But we have spaces that are 20, 25 years old. They are not efficient in terms of costs. And as we've seen in the last 2 years, you've got to try and stay ahead of these rising costs. So it's about looking everywhere, Chairman. As Catherine has said, the process has already started. There is a renewed emphasis that future investment requires future efficiencies. They go hand in hand. As Catherine has also said, that it's not just a capital programme, it's a project programme. All of those projects are subject to robust process. Do they still need to go ahead? Are they still good value? Have they been superseded by something else? I'll give you an example. We were very close to pressing the button on some contact management software 2 years ago. We held off it. The opportunity to invest in something considerably better now is there. And that is exactly the type of decision we make on every single one of these projects. Even with estates, we're going to move into 5 or 6 new fire spaces this year, so police working out of fire spaces. If more come up, then some of these current plans might be superseded by something better. So it's about being fleet of foot. They've done it last year. They've made savings beyond the original plan. And as Catherine has said, it means there's a lower demand at the end of next year than we'd planned for last year. If we keep making savings in the order of 6 or 7 million, then the gap goes away. I'm just very realistic about how you do that when you're already lean. The other side for me actually is this is not an optimistic budget. We're seeing some very large forces already budgeting pay awards of 2% and things like that for next year. Just don't think it's reasonable. And we don't think inflation lower than what we're putting in here is reasonable. And we're not absolutely sure of the government funding position. So this is it's a practical budget, it's not an optimistic one. And at every point we'll be assessing, if they don't deliver the savings, we will not make those extra investments. It's as simple as that.
From the public
sorry, you asked me about AI. If I may, Chair, one really good example is we're trialling some, or looking at trials at the moment, where AI is being used in CCTV monitoring, as it happens. This is at the stations where somebody is watching the screens. AI is far better at spotting odd behaviour than a human. It doesn't miss it. There might be 20 screens. It isn't going to miss someone looking shifty. It can also identify people that may be carrying a weapon. So there's technology stepping into spaces we couldn't even imagine only a year ago. Now that could well lead to people being able to spend their time doing victim-focused or investigation work when at the moment they're staring at a screen. So it's a real live opportunity.
The 4.99%, the community are going to be asking, well, what am I getting for my book? And I'm sure we can tell them you're going to be kept safe by the police, you'll be looked after, and the police force will become more efficient. Will they be more readily available? I mean, that may be an operational question, but the everlasting drumbeat message is we never see a police officer, etc. Is there anything in your budget that will help the Chief Constable address that?
Yep, if they're more productive, it's more time to be patrolling, it's more time to be responding, more time to spend with victims. And actually, Chairman, our survey in the last year has shown that people have noticed the difference. They are seeing more officers, they are more visible, they do feel more informed. We've added 400 officers in just over 4 years. That is getting on for a 25% increase. A bunch of them are in neighbourhood spaces. They are patrolling antisocial behaviour hotspots. Officers and PCSOs, massively compared with 2.5 years ago, are doing their neighbourhood job as well. They aren't backfilling for what was an inefficient response model based on 3 hubs. Now we've got response in every district. That means that neighbourhood policing and road policing are out there doing their core job, and anyone who's scanning social media at the moment will see that they're pulling over vehicles, stopping overloaded goods, tracking down people with uninsured cars, and quite often uncovering stuff in the boot. So we want to see more and more of that. The Chief Constable is absolutely determined, not just physically seeing people, but more time, and a big step change from reaction to proactivity, prevention, getting in sooner, not allowing things to escalate where the time permits. And also for both of us, we talk about service. It isn't difficult to give a service that's as good as a commercial or private enterprise. You'll be told by a parcel delivery company when they're coming to deliver your parcel. You won't necessarily be told by the police how the progress is going on your case, or if the courts are likely to list your case and when that might be. I think those levels of service are something we can and should add on now that we're getting on top of response and contact. It's about that ongoing feedback relationship and better engagement. And that will make people feel confident as well. It's not just seeing a traditional Bobby on the beat, it's about the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Ben, in your pre-amp, you mentioned the road police unit, and I think without them we obviously don't have safer roads. But I'm acutely aware that we do have a high figure of fatality within Staffordshire. And if I was then being parochial, I'm going to say the Lichfield district. And if I'm going to take that even further, my own county division have had 3, including an awful hit and run, which the police are doing a wonderful job, I might add, in terms of the investigation, and I applaud them on that. But my concern is that they're still thin on the ground, and we're expecting, you know, the size of the county and its mileage and so forth. We're spreading ourselves thin, and yet expecting quite a lot from them. So it really is for me looking at you in a sense of that, giving them the resources that really does make the difference, rather than just the lip service. We have put 400 over the last 4 years back on the beat, but it's also in particular in the RPU section, because we've got a lot of roads on our you know, the M6 obviously runs straight through us, but I'm concerned about elsewhere within our county, and I'm sure everybody will be able to recognise the sadness that it can say, but having them makes the public feel a lot better, I think. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can I just go back to Catherine with a question now? Continue with that questions, if I may. Budget support reserves in the brochure. I think after year 25-26, they're depleted. So what's going to happen if that reserve is gone?
Yeah, okay, so yeah, that's right. So what will happen at the at the end of the financial year, if that underspend position is increased, we'll be able to put some more back into the budget support reserve so that it will go a little bit further. That is the prudent forecast, that it will run out sort of by April 2025. Where we can, we would top it up. You wouldn't sort of take anything from any of the other reserves because those are earmarked all for specific things. That's why the transformation sort of savings programme is so key, really, because that is the thing that is going to plug the gap towards the end of the MTFS. I think, just to make a point again, it's really good we have a budget support reserve. A lot of forces don't even have one of those. And I think it's at a robust level at the moment. And like I say, a lot of the assumptions are prudent, slightly pessimistic, so that position could improve. It could last a little bit further into the future, and if we have underspends or any additional grant that we can put into there, we will to top it up to get it to go further.
Okay, I heard a lot of, excuse me, maybe, could, and the importance of the transformation programme. So if I could just ask the Commissioner, do you feel then, I would like to get a sense at the end of this meeting that there is a sense of pace behind this transformation programme, mindful of what Catherine has just said to us. Could you give us an overview on that, please, Commissioner?
Yeah, I'll restate it, Chairman. It started already. It started already. We need to be making the savings in the order of £6-7 million a year to meet the gap in this budget. The investments are predicated on making them. It's not a case of spending and then worrying about it later. Actually, a key here is that the investments in IT and estates are invest-to-save projects. They're about productivity, reducing costs, increasing the capacity of officers and staff to do more. Catherine's quite right to point out the budget support reserve is not normal. That's something we've had here for 2 or 3 years. I don't believe we had one before, and I don't believe many other forces have got one at all. It goes back a little bit to some legacy asset sales and things like that that meant we had reserves, and it also meant that the organisation was generally funding expansion and investment without having to borrow. Now, clearly, going forward, we're going to have to borrow, and one of the issues is with inflation and interest rates, the cost of borrowing is not quite the same as it was 2 years ago. The plans nationally are equally having to revise their thoughts. And whilst we've been, as I say, not pessimistic but not optimistic about that going forward, it's unlikely the costs of capital 2-3 years down the line will be what they are today. No, we need to make the savings in order to fulfil the plans. Chairman, can I just make a note on what Councillor Cox said about road policing?
Okay, will you keep it brief?
It'll be just a very brief one. Yeah, we are investing in roads policing. And by the way, my deputy, Helen, he apologises for not being here because she'd have come back very quickly. Actually, we're going to 24-hour, 7-day-a-week roads policing, as well as that in terms of the Central Motorway Police Group, which we do with West Midlands. And as I say, if you're anywhere near social media at the moment, you'll see that that they are everywhere doing their core job. They're not doing response work anymore like they were 2 years ago. They're doing proper roads policing. 44 people died this year, Councillor Cox, and we were talking about this, the Chief Constable in this room, a week or so ago. It's too many. It's too many. The roads cameras, the fixed cameras, I invested in ANPR cameras to help us with the criminality last year. Those teams are out there tracking drug drivers, drink drivers, uninsured drivers. Far too often those three are a factor in those accidents. Meanwhile, we've all got to do our bit around making sure people remember to wear visible clothing. 3 or 4 people killed wearing difficult to see, which is really unfortunate, and a few pedestrians as well. So, absolutely priority. It's not going to fall off my list of priorities just because we're doing well at it now. It needs to stay there. Staffordshire's a big place. It needs the roads policing properly.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Merrick, I'll just finish off my point. I don't know whether you'd be prepared to share with us, Commissioner, but just get some assurance that you perhaps have KPIs on the specific transformation activities, because we'd like to know how they're progressing, if that's okay with you. Would you be able to give us a progress statement, or internally at your HQ, have you a series of KPIs on these sorts of activities?
I think that's something that would be... We do a quarterly update, don't we, on finances, back to the panel. I think that would be an entirely reasonable thing. If we could include on the agenda progress on transformation, then absolutely happy to do that, yeah.
Thank you very much. Mandy, could we make a note of that? Thank you. Councillor Williams.
I'm going to make this brief because you've picked up what I was going to say. It's 90 million of the transformation requirement by 27-28 is a sizable number. So I think I'll just echo those comments about some more detail. We've heard some words about what that means in terms of transformation, but I think we need some detailed understanding of what plans sit behind that, because it is a significant amount of money to find by that period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Councillor Atkins.
Yes, given all the investment you're putting into buildings and other capital items, I can see that the capital reserve builds up year on year, but you're not dipping into the capital reserve. Is there any particular reason you're not doing that?
Yeah, so with the capital programme, where we, that's a good question, because where we can use a reserve, we will do. That'll be priority. So you'll see the IT transformation reserve drops down. Some of that is being used to fund the investments into ICT as well. The capital reserve, I don't know the detail behind those figures because I haven't got my laptop on, sorry, but it could be ring fenced. So some of the, if that were to be, say, a capital receipt, often that's earmarked for sort of particular work in that same area, if that makes sense. So it could be as simple as something like that. I'd have to have a look at the detail and come back to you on that one. That's okay.
They are down as usable reserves, so I'm assuming...
But for specific things, it's an earmarked reserve. So it's usable, but it's for a specific purpose. It is an earmarked reserve.
Could you come back to us on that?
Pardon?
Could you come back to us on that?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, I will do, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Krupski.
Thank you, Chair. Unless I've missed something, what I was really sort of looking for was actual tangible savings or improvements in operational performance and financial metrics. They're missing. I'm a great believer, you know, if you've invested or you're going to invest an extra 10 million, I want to see exactly where we're getting those efficiencies. Are we getting 12 million back? And that, unfortunately, is sadly missing. And I would also make the point, just looking through the pack, it is incredibly detailed pack of 125 pages, but in terms of the transformation requirement, on a personal note, I would say that's rather woolly for the price tag. It's not clear, there's no clarity on what it is, how it would be spent, and what benefits we will obtain from that. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Chairman, sorry, just to step back a moment, the capital reserve, I've just lost sight of where that was. Are we saying that's not reducing over the period? The earmarked reserve increases. Interesting. I'd expect some of those capital projects to be paid for by that earmarked reserve. So, yeah, we will come back to you on that. Yeah, because the rest, that suggests the rest of the capital is being paid for by new borrowing outside of those projects, which doesn't quite tally with my thinking.
Obviously, obviously you're making the points that you obviously use your own resources rather than borrowing from outside. So it would be counterintuitive not to use capital reserves, wouldn't it?
If they're earmarked for something, and I'd expect,
yeah.
I would expect in the next 4 or 5 years, some of that something will be need the investment. So the one around the Appendix 8, the savings there, that's a detail there of what is already being looked at for next year. It provides you with a number of pages, and it goes over, in fact you can see there that we're looking over the corporate side, the Deputy's command area. That's quite a substantial bit of detail there ahead of where we're already working in expected savings. And I think the bottom line, 4 or 5 pages later, is over £6 million. The process to get to that is exactly where we are again now for those future years as well. So we've got some freezes on recruitments, reductions in expenses, incomes on events. There's some rechargeable stuff that we have to do. There'll be standard practices like reducing overtime, things of that nature, which having more officers allows us to do. We recover income when the service is asked to go and support projects in London and elsewhere. That was a heavy year last year with the coronation and so forth. So actually I'm not sure I entirely agree that that's not a comprehensive listing based on what we're looking at for the next 12 months. Very happy to come back, as I've said, as that develops for the future years. Does that tackle or help with that query? Or
yes, I think to an extent. Unfortunately, I'm more used to more metrics. For instance, if you're investing an extra X number of millions, your service levels need to improve. What does that mean? So your crime rate is going to go down, or your detection is going to go down. I don't see that there. Now I know this is operational, but this is a budget for that operation. So if I'm going to invest a significant amount of money, I would expect crime rates to fall, detection rates to improve, etc. So I think we need a lot more metrics here.
Mr. Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, just remind members of the panel that we have 3 times a year I have a public performance meeting with the Chief Constable. There's another hefty pack, you'll be pleased to know, which goes into quite a lot of detail about metrics, making the connection there to particularly things like timeliness of investigations, how quickly we can get cases to the CPS, number of officers and PCSOs engaged in patrolling, how we're doing with contact. I mean, the big investment here, which will continue around contact centre, that's around metrics like now being one of the top 10 on 999 response in the country. I want to do the same around 101. A lot of this is about the things we can control, but also around improvements in service and perception and confidence, because we're in the business of helping people to feel safe as well as being safe. They already live in a very safe place. A number of people unnecessarily concern themselves from reading the paper thinking that we're other places. Actually, with Staffordshire, it's a pretty good, safe place to live. And communicating that, helping them to understand what the service have done around their particular concern is really important as well. So I'm comfortable that we cover the metrics around performance in those meetings. I think it's a fair challenge, Chair, and I thank you for this, that where we've got investments that are going to lead to a service outcome, we could better display that linkage. And I will take that forward, and that can definitely be something we hang these quarterly updates off.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any further questions? Councillor Cox.
Thank you. Going to help me here, probably Catherine. Regarding page 50, where we have obviously at the bottom there total revenue of budget, and just above that the transformation requirement, and then net uses of reserves. Could you talk me through the net uses of reserves? Because it seems to me, if I understand it right, we're heading towards not having much reserves, if I read that right.
Is this Appendix 6? Sorry, I've got slightly different page numbers. So that one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that we have actually picked this up. So for future iterations, I think that line net use of reserves is going to be broken down a little bit more to have a little bit more detail, because only part of that line is the budget support reserve. There's other, it's like the Commissioner's Office has got a reserve for some of his spend. So they're not running out. No, that's not sort of what it's saying. The budget support reserve is going to run out by April 2025, we're forecasting at the moment. And then the rest of the drawdown on this net use of reserves is from the operational reserves line in the reserves appendix. I've got it as page 100, sorry, it might be a different page number. So it is drawing down on some specific reserves, the budget support reserve and some within the operational reserves line, but by no means are we running out at all, no. So you can still see total usable reserves by the end of the MTFS period is 27.5 million, which is still significantly more than a lot of other police forces. Is that okay?
One other question. Staffordshire, and again, I'm sounding parochial here, but acutely aware we're going into a different world. I mean, world that we're in, and certain areas down in the Shenstone, for example, there's a lot of pressure that surely is under the force to obviously man those demonstrations that are occurring, which possibly are going to occur a little bit more often, more planned. Instead of just half a dozen people, we're going to get high numbers. Is your budget, does it allow for those kind of resources without losing sight of what happens with the rest of the county in policing? Because you could be pulling in resources from all over the county, and even, dare say it, from next door in terms of West Midlands. Are we comfortable?
Yeah, Councillor Cox, yeah. The operational decisions, risks, the assessment of what goes forward is in the Chief Constable's policing plan, and the budget is there primarily to support it. I've talked before about how disappointing it is to me that a huge resource goes into managing protest. I think sometimes people lose, they don't quite see the impact of that, because if they're there, they can't be somewhere else. And quite often they can't be doing something that a large number of people think it might be even more important. The Chief Constable's comfortable with where we are. They make assessments about all sorts of things on that basis. And the resources will flex. I think we needed 60 people to support a protest at Shenstone the other day again, which is really discouraging. But yes, they are entirely based on the risk profile. I think it's important to just picking up on that and the conversation we've had around capital. There's invest to save projects. There's projects that will very much allow people to provide better service. There's also a good chunk of stuff we have to do. We have to have new tasers next year. The College of Policing requires us to have certain standards of firearms training. It required us last year to have new standards for personal safety training, which involved building a new training centre for that. I think there does have to be, in that world, Councillor Cox, a sort of recognition at the very highest level that if there are new pressures on policing here, they need to be reflected by those who in senior leadership positions are saying they want the service to be this state-of-the-art thing. Actually, we might not be able to afford it. We might not be able to afford being excellent in some areas if we've got to do day-to-day policing, more protests, whatever it is. In general, the only increasing crime demand is fraud, online fraud, issues with technology-related crime. In other areas, we're seeing increased reporting, which is positive in the sense if we're getting more reporting about domestic abuse, then we can be in and sorting it out sooner. It's not necessarily the case that there's more domestic abuse than there was. It can be additional reporting. So the country is safer than it was. But I think there is a balance to be struck. If suddenly everybody is busy managing civil unrest, and I'm not saying that will happen, then okay, we need some recognition that we can't step in with firearms training centres and things like that, which we're being obliged to do at the moment. It's a tricky one, that.
Catherine, if I may just, I picked up on a statement in the paper, the MRP statement, where it was, a figure was set at 4%, and words used now are prudent provision or prudent provisions. What exactly does that mean? Instead of 4%.
Instead of 4%. So I think this is around, it's sort of the cost of the debt around the capital programme. So that will have increased. We've used 4% in previous years, and I'd have to look at the detail again, I think. But I guess we've just reduced it slightly, I think, down from the 4%. What number's the sentence?
I knew you'd ask me that. I made a note on my papers here. It is in the document. Perhaps you could have a look after the meeting if any colleagues can pick it up for me.
Okay.
But I was interested to know what prudent provision would mean. Does that mean you're going to increase it? You can't afford to pay 4%? Just some clarity around the figure, really.
Okay.
It's early on in the document.
If I may, when we say, with a lot of these assumptions in this document, we're not an outlier exactly, but we are at the safer side of these assumptions. So prudent there might just be other forces are putting in, thinking they're going to borrow at 3% because you used to be able to borrow at 1% 2 years ago. Well, I don't think that's realistic. So it's more likely to be prudent in the sense that we're erring on the cautious side as we do with the rest of our assumptions. I know some very large forces, in fact the largest, are putting budgets in for 2% pay rises in the next year. It's not going to happen, is it? So it's as likely as anything to be around that type of assumption we make when we're setting these provisions.
I wonder if I may ask, and we're meeting again on the 12th of February, I think. I'd be happy to take a response then, if you could just some clarity, excuse me, around that statement, please.
Good idea, because it will be in the file as well.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions, colleagues? Right. Well, thank you, Commissioner, for that presentation. We'll adjourn now and deliberate, and then we'll be back as soon as we possibly can. Thank you.
Great.
Does that work?
Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation, and thank you, Catherine, for adding clarity to the points that we felt we needed some further details on. The transformation details are important to this committee, and we expect to see them delivered, and visible crime reduction, for example, become apparent to the community. We expect to see performance against the transformation criteria. The committee agree to the proposed increase of 4.99% in the Precept Commissioner's Council tax contribution. I think that closes that item on the agenda. Have you any further questions, Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman. Do you intend to cover off the other items in that pack, the Treasury document and the consultation on Precept, or was that all part of the same agenda item? I'd just like to thank really everybody that took the time to respond. And you'll see in the consultation about the Precept, there are some people who didn't support an increase and clearly are not getting the level of service and support that they want. Equally, there's others who are very, very keen to say they would like to back their police service and invest some more. But I'd just like to thank them for responding, because it makes a big difference to
just let me add a bit of clarity around that. And I think it's page 26 in the paper. All of those bullet points are noted and come under the umbrella that I've just announced.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much. And I absolutely take on board those requests, and we'd certainly pick them up in that quarterly update as you suggest. I think that's an excellent idea.
Right, thank you. Item 7 on the agenda is the National Conference for Police, Fire and Crime Panels. That was held on the 9th of November. My colleague, Councillor Cox, attended, and Mandy and myself were there via Teams. Let me ask Councillor Cox for his views and opinions of that session, please.
Thank you, Chair. The main thrust of the conference was how the interaction between panel and commissioner is, and in turn as well the possibilities of big change ahead of ourselves throughout the country, and so there was a lot of emphasis was based on that. The use of 2 days, and it's not, I've got to be careful in terms of criticising those that provide training. I think it's important to recognise how important those providers are. But it would probably be wise that the panel, through you, Chair, was to contact the chairman of the Association for Police Crime, Mr. Gill, I can't remember his surname now, in a view of reviewing the agenda that makes it a little bit more interesting. I've attended 3 conferences, and I think we were getting a bit same, which could, terminology then, you sum that same up and you end up with the word stale, which is, which isn't, you know. So I think it's worthwhile, but I do think that we do need to ask for a little bit more to clarity in terms of what kind of training there is regarding a conference. But that would be my recommendation, Chair. And yeah, I find them useful outside the sessions. I find it useful talking to other chairs and vice chairs throughout the country. So the networking side of it, I think you gain quite a lot from it, and to see what good practices there are. I think for us, what I did feel was that the panel's interaction with our commissioner, I know he's in the room, I think is good. I got the impression that some of the commissioners and some of the panels, the relationship perhaps isn't as good. So it was an emphasis on that as well, trying to be more working together in many respects for a good outcome.
I've received similar feedback, and I think there was something on the Houses of Parliament. They were doing a scrutiny on commissioners, and there were one or two people talking about the different relationships that this type of panel have with the commissioner. And we thank you, Commissioner, for your openness and transparency in these meetings. And I think the bottom line is we do think that you're listening. After today's meeting and the budget, we'll see whether you're delivering. But that will be our focus, I think, moving forward. Right, well, thank you for that, Councillor Cox. Sorry.
Sorry, just a couple of comments there. It's interesting. Clearly, that's the panel and how you train and so on is your business. There have been a couple of really interesting select committee meetings with PCCs, PFCCs and others around that piece of legislation. There have been some comments and questions about panels' efficiencies. I must say I find the process to be supportive, challenging, but supportive and helpful. That is in direct contrast to a number of other places where I'm afraid it's a political, in some cases, political showcase. And I don't think that's helpful. I don't think it's what the public expect from their commissioner or the panel, actually. It's a place where we're all trying to make sure resources are used wisely and the public are being kept safe. There's some suggestions that panels might not stick around. I think that is entirely to miss the point. They need to all be as efficient and effective as this one, in my opinion.
Thank you, Chair. Chair? Thank you, Commissioner. Right, item 8 on the agenda. Any questions for the Commissioner from panel members? I have one to open, if I may. We see in the document, and it's been brought forward several times, a constant reference to the firing range. Now, if we just come from the outside, we think, well, there isn't a lot happening here. I know it's an expensive piece of work, but what are your intentions regarding the firing range?
This is very much a live subject. The planning has been approved. I think it's now gone through its final REBA stages. We have a project, we have a site, we have a budget. It's a good example, actually, of what I said earlier. The capital programme is a really good plan for where we want to go. But even this project, I have not finally signed it off yet. I've asked for one more look at the potential for sharing the resource with neighbours. I would expect to know within the next few weeks exactly where we're going with that. And it also goes to Councillor Cox's point. The college have expectations around firearms training. We can't anticipate those expectations getting any less demanding for all the right reasons. A lot of the original plans were, or a lot of the original training programs were based on firearms activity with perhaps people on building tops, rooftops, things like that, or a type of intervention. In recent years, where firearms officers have had to tackle terrorist events and things like that, they've nearly all been as a result of operating out the back of armed response vehicles. So the range has to allow for big vehicles to go into the range, do all their activities, the teams jump out the back and do their training. Something that wasn't imagined 20 years ago. So the world's moved on, but and interesting at the moment to note the number of officers in the Met area who have unfortunately handed back their tickets around armed response, because they're very concerned about the loss of anonymity of their colleague as a result of him doing his job. So I think it's an area where we need to keep our eye, but just remember that these officers really do put themselves at risk. And knowing that even if they do what they're trained to do, they may come under intense scrutiny. It's something I want to be sure is right for our armed fire officers. At the moment, the facility is not suitable. You and the panel know that. You've seen the plan. Working in a field is not appropriate. So I'm very hopeful of making a firm decision on that. That's my plan. Before the PERDA period, I would like this not to be a question that preoccupies the service for another 2 or 3 years. It's not helpful.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any further questions for the Commissioner? No? Right, thank you. Item 9 on the agenda is the date of the next meeting, which is February the 12th, and it's 10 a.m. 10 a.m. in the morning. No need to exclude the public. There is nothing at item 10. So at that point, I'll close the meeting. It's 15:51. Thank you for your attendance, and we'll see you on February the 12th, Commissioner. Thank you, and your team.